Welcome to the Catholic Theology Show, sponsored in part by Annunciation Circle, a community who supports the mission of Ave Maria University through their monthly donations of $10 or more. If you'd like to support the mission of Ave Maria and this podcast, please consider looking at avemaria.edu/donate for more information. I'm your host, Michael Dauphinais, and today I am happy to be joined by Stephen Jensen, professor of philosophy and the director of the Center for Thomistic Studies at the University of St. Thomas in Houston.
Thank you for having me. Correction, I used to be the director.
So you were released from administrative bondage?
I was released from prison, yes.
That's great. That's great.
I'm now a lowly teacher, and happily so.
That's great. And you're visiting Ave Maria to give a talk with the Thomistic Institute.
Correct.
And so glad to have you here on campus. And, you know, you spent over 30 years teaching and over 40 years studying questions about human nature. And how do we understand really, right, what does it mean to be human? And you've chosen to speak on this topic of transhumanism, what you call a new eugenics. So could you say a little bit about what is transhumanism?
Right? Sure. It's literally the term means beyond human, right? Transhuman. The idea is that we can use technology to improve human beings. We can maybe put chips in the brain to improve intelligence or to improve memory. We can use genetic engineering to increase strength or, again, increase mental capacities. Maybe even give us some new capacities. We can use pharmaceuticals to help us out in various ways. And ultimately, if we make enough changes, so the idea is, we might get beyond being human so that what we create is no longer even human beings.
Now, this would sound, or it certainly sounds to some people, like a wonderful project. Why not, try to alleviate suffering, overcome limitations?
Exactly. That's what they proclaim is the great thing. And I connect it with eugenics because that's what eugenics has always been proclaiming. Think of Hitler's master race, right? If we create the master race, then we overcome so many difficulties inherent in our defective natures as we have them. So, but now the idea is we really have the technology to do it, right? In a sense, they're not, it's all in vogue, of course, to reject Hitler. And they reject the coercive elements of Hitler, but the vision, they don't. And they really say it was the methods of Hitler that were the issue, not so much the ultimate goal or project. So, yeah. We can eliminate sickness. We can eliminate crime. It's a utopia, as all utopias are, but it's a utopia that they think is engrasped by way of technology.
Now, in your talk, you mentioned at one time that you have to make a distinction between kind of enhancing human nature versus maybe healing defects of human nature. Could you expand on that distinction?
Yeah, it's a fairly typical distinction in the literature, and this is all largely secular literature that you find out there. So there are the people who are proclaiming, we've got to do this transhumanist transformation. And then there are those who are saying, well, we should put on the brakes, right? And we should watch out. There's trouble. And those who say there's trouble here are the ones who are typically making this distinction between treatment or healing and enhancing, on the other hand. So what's the difference between the two? So treatment means that there is some defect or ailment and you're overcoming it. I mean, it's as simple as you have a bacterial infection in the lungs, that's a defect. You take an antibiotic and that cures you of it. So you use technology, but not to improve nature as you have it, but to correct a defect that's there. So too, if you lost a leg and you put a prosthetic limb on, you're correcting a defect. Now, enhancing means, well, no, there's no defect necessarily present. We're just going to go above and beyond. So you have whatever your intelligence is. It's not defective, but hey, we could improve it. And so let's enhance it. Let's get it to be better. And so that's typically the distinction. So when the people who are, cautioning against this transhumanism bring this up, they say, look, healing is completely legitimate, that we can use technology to heal people. The problem comes in enhancing, right? That's where we're going to end up really with a dystopia is typically the line that people take who are opposing this.
Wow. So it's really fascinating, that idea that you move from the promised utopia of everyone being healthy and happy and like Superman and Wonder Woman or something like this. And yet, right, that actually would become a dystopian vision. So what happens that makes this actually kind of an alarming prospect?
Well, what I've tended to focus on, and this is really picking up on some thoughts of Michael Sandel at Harvard, what I've focused upon is a kind of false love that's involved here. And the image I think that's best, and this really just comes straight out of Sandel, is parental love, right? That we all know of the parent who really has a kind of false love, where what they want is for Junior to succeed so that will show how great dad is or mom is, right? Yeah. The soccer mom or something along that image. Somebody who is loving the child in the sense of giving them good things, great education, training them to play some sport in some fantastic way, whatever it might be. But there's a backhandedness to it. There's a sense in which, what I really want here is something for myself and not for my child. And the thing is, the child picks up on this, right? The child knows that, I've got lots of nice things, but I'm missing something really important here. And what's that something important? It's really love, right? And so you end up with this dystopia because however many good things you have, if you don't have love, all those good things are useless. You think of Howard Hughes, and where I teach, is the theology department is housed in the house where Howard Hughes grew up, as a matter of fact. But Howard Hughes, at one time the richest man in America. And he said at one point, the only thing I really want is a true friend, I mean, he had all that he could want materially, but all that was useless, pointless if nobody really loved him.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of that, almost that's a biblical wisdom of, right, it's not good for man to be alone, right? It's to be in a cosmos, even with beauty, would be lonely, right? Exactly. We need somehow a friend, a companion. So what is it about then this idea of transhumanism that makes us lonelier, right? Why is it that it's anti-love? Maybe just connect the dots a little bit more for me.
Sure. So the idea of there being a good is connected with there being a human nature, or any nature, really. I mean, if you talk about what's the good of a pen, it's to write well, but that depends upon there being some notion of what a pen is, right? It's not good for a hammer to write well, right? And it's good for a hammer to pound, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be good for the pen to pound, right? To be a good pen depends upon what a pen is. And it's the same thing when it comes to human beings. What's good for a human being is going to depend upon what we are. And so you need some nature, but a nature is something received, right? You don't make your own nature. I mean, that's what these people want to do, is make their own nature, right? But really, a human nature is something received, and therefore the human good is something received, and it depends upon that nature. And really, we are good precisely because we have this nature, right? So think about, well, a pen is good because it has the nature of something that can write, right? Because things have a purpose, they're good. And then, of course, we want them to fulfill their purpose, and they become even better, we might say, right? But just to be a certain kind of thing is good. But the transhumanist vision just thinks that you can accumulate good things disconnected from nature. So we aren't good of ourselves. We're good only by piling up good things, okay? And that's this kind of false love that I was saying, right? So how does a real parent love the child? Well, because the child is a good being in himself, right? Obviously, they want the child to develop and things like this. But if you start with the child is not good unless I add on a slew of perfections, that's where you've messed up the notion of love. So that's what these transhumanists do. They don't have a nature that they can receive because they're going to create a new human nature. All they have is perfections they can pile up one on top of the other, perfections that, quite frankly, make no sense without a nature to begin with, but they don't recognize that. So the value of any human being is not because of what they are. It becomes entirely based upon what they have accomplished or what perfections have been added onto them. And that's the dystopian false love.
Yeah. It's interesting if you think about that because, well, anyway, there's a lot of different insights there that first is this idea that what does it mean to be a human being? And does it mean to be able to solve complex math problems? To have like super intelligence? Does it mean to be particularly strong, to live a particularly long time? All of these things are real and we notice them, right? And we certainly notice when they're lacking. It can be frustrating to be beaten in sports, or whatever it is. But then there's also, right, just the capacity for relationships, the capacity for communion, that I can recognize another person as a person and enter into a relationship with them. And, right, that can't be really subject to these kinds of enhancements and manipulations.
No, although they want to think that they can, right? So there's a big movement to develop oxytocin, which is a hormone that they say is released in love relationships here, right? And if we can, use this, we can overcome all, the lack of love in the world. But that's, not very realistic, quite frankly. But I think back to your point, you're absolutely right that the relation is what matters, not piling up these perfections, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, really, the perfections are in the service of the relation, right? And I mean that, we can misconceive it too. We can think, oh, well, human beings are rational animals, and so our completion is in understanding the truth, which is all true. I mean, I don't want to deny that. But if all you're doing is looking at the completion, you've missed really an important point. The completions are meant to order yourself beyond yourself, right? Ultimately to the divine, but also to other human beings. So any completion that we have is really for others. It's really a self-emptying, a self-giving that this involves. And so once you destroy that, you lose self-giving and you've lost love. Everything is just focused back in on yourself. But even yourself you don't love because what you want is just this pile of perfections and you don't have a vision of yourself as ordered.
Yeah, there's a line from George Orwell he wrote it, I think, I'm trying to remember, he wrote it like in 1937, but he was basically talking about kind of, the socialists at the time, or, the socialists and the communists and the ones who were sympathetic and kind of fans of Stalin and the Soviet Union in England at the time in the 1930s. But he said basically that what Orwell was saying, and he would become famous, soon in about a decade for the Animal Farm story, but exposing kind of communism. But what he said there is that he said the socialists and the communists are not motivated by a love of the poor, but by a hatred of the rich. And obviously in any individual case, like of an individual person, who knows, right? But at least as a general thing, it's very easy to motivate a lot of people by kind of resentment and hatred, kind of a dislike of the way things are. And yet that becomes kind of it becomes almost a self-deception that we think we're doing things out of love, trying to make things better, but we're actually profoundly dissatisfied and angry kind of with the way things are. So how does that factor into kind of, it seems to me, because there's a kind of something in the transhumanism thing that you've been talking about, the lack of love might even be so far as kind of a dislike of ourselves.
Yes, I think very much. And that's part of the reason I connected to eugenics is for this reason. And it's important to recognize eugenics is not something that started with Hitler. Hitler is its most famous proponent, but it started with Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton, in England. It got its biggest start in the United States. This would be the late 1800s, early 1900s. Where I think there were 28 states that had sterilization laws, and of course the famous Oliver Wendell Holmes Supreme Court decision, in which he said 3 generations of imbeciles is enough, which means we can sterilize this 3rd generation so we don't end up with another generation of imbecile. Now, imbecile to us is a put-down term in a sense that it wouldn't have been to Oliver Wendell Holmes, so you don't want to read that too strongly, but still, it's a pretty harsh statement. So, what are you doing there? Are you loving intelligent people, or are you hating imbeciles? Right? And realistically, all that eugenics could do was eliminate the unfit. Right, and it's connected with Francis Galton was Charles Darwin's cousin, but there's more than a blood relation there. There's an intellectual relation of the survival of the fittest, really giving rise to this idea of eugenics, right? So what could they do? That they could eliminate the unfit, right, so that we just have the fit left over, right? Now, when Hitler came to power and eventually we defeated Hitler, eugenics got a bad name. Eugenics was, as I say, moving along strongly in the United States. There were several eugenics societies in the United States. What happened after World War II? Well, they didn't disappear. They all changed their names to eliminate the word eugenics. None of them changed their goals. They just changed their names, and many of them are still around today. Some are now feeling comfortable bringing eugenics back into their names, showing a kind of shift that might be going on. Now, these transhumanists will come along and say, well, yeah, but we've gone beyond that. We have the technology just to improve. We don't have to just cut down those who are unfit. But, if you look at what's actually being done, like Iceland proclaimed, I don't know, probably 10, 15 years ago, that they had eliminated Down syndrome, as if this was some great positive accomplishment. Well, what was it? It was that with prenatal testing, where they could determine with some accuracy that this is a Down syndrome baby, they aborted all the Down syndrome babies. So he was still eliminating the unfit. It's not like we had this great technological breakthrough by which we could, improve conception so that we never ended up with Down syndrome babies. No, we just killed off the Down syndrome babies, and that's a kind of dislike, as you say, of this. And again, I'm sure you know Down syndrome babies as I do, or children, and they're wonderful,
Yeah.
But what's there is this dislike of the imperfect, I think, that's going on. And that even bends back upon oneself, right? So I say, oh, they have this vision of loving themselves, which is piling up these perfections. Well, we all know deep down at any rate that we're deeply flawed. And when they kind of recognize this, there's this turning hatred against themselves. And I think you've really hit the nail on the head with regard to communism and socialism, that, there's a kind of deep hatred that's going on there. It might arise by a kind of just anger, right? That the rulers or the rich people are being unjust to the poor, right? And so you're angry about that. But, St. Thomas Aquinas says one of the two emotions that give rise to hatred most readily is anger, the other being envy. And you mentioned envy as well. So you're envious of the rich. You're angry at them for being unjust. You got the two emotions that most readily give rise to hate. I think very much that a dislike, even stronger than that, a hatred, can be at the bottom of this a lot of times.
Yeah. Dr. Jensen, would you say a bit about how did you get interested in maybe studying philosophy, right? How did you get interested in, the Catholic faith? And just tell us a bit how you went from there to then all of a sudden writing on, transhumanism one day.
Yeah, well, okay, well, that's going back years, I guess. So I didn't necessarily have a particularly religious high school time, but near the end, my senior year, I believe, I kind of began to take my faith seriously, and eventually that led me to enter the seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota, where at the University of St. Thomas, there was a wonderful Thomistic philosophy department. So eventually I left seminary, but I had been encountered this Thomism, and it was like nothing I had seen before, because I had largely a secular training, So when I left the seminary, I said, well, I'd kind of be interested in pursuing this philosophy. And at the time, Ralph McInerney, since deceased, was sort of the prominent Thomist in the United States. So I packed up and went off to Notre Dame to study with Ralph McInerney. And I was interested in ethics more than anything, which would lead me eventually to aspects of transhumanism. So I studied St. Thomas's ethics, and in that study recognized the importance of human nature for ethics. And so running across this transhumanism that says we're going to get beyond human nature, I figured there's something awry here.
That's beautifully put, and what a great story of kind of pursuing that call to both kind of follow our Lord and to follow that calling into this search for wisdom, and to really dedicating your life to kind of seeking that and then passing that on to generations of students.
Absolutely. I love teaching. So.
That's great. I was also blessed when I was at Notre Dame in my graduate studies. I was able to get some funding I was able to work for Ralph McInerney in the summers and get to know him. He was really just one of the kindest, just the soul of a lion, but also just such a gentle spirit.
Oh, yeah.
He was great.
You can drop in at any moment, and he'd set everything aside and just chat with you.
Yes. It was great. He was running a center. I think he ended up publishing over like 50 novels and stuff like that. And yet at the same time, was very hospitable and really kind of, in years when Thomism was somewhat kind of dropped by many people in the 70s and 80s, he was, one of a handful of people who kept, the tradition of philosophical and theological, study of St. Thomas, right, alive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he was brilliant. I mean, he could really intuit what was going on in philosophical issues in a way that most people can't. He was fluent in multiple languages, as you say. He's writing all these novels on top of writing books on philosophy and teaching and whatnot. He was really an amazing man.
That's great. We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I really want us to talk a little bit more about what's this notion of nature? Because I think that's something that we really don't understand what nature means now. And I think it's a lot of the source of the confusion. Is nature something to be received? Is it something to be fixed? Is it something that's above us? Is it below us? Anyway, so I want to talk a little bit more about what's up with nature.
That sounds good.
You're listening to the Catholic Theology Show, presented by Ave Maria University and sponsored in part by Annunciation Circle. Through their generous donations of $10 or more per month, Annunciation Circle members directly support the mission of AMU to be a fountainhead of renewal for the Church through our faculty, staff, students, and alumni. To learn more, visit avemaria.edu/join. Thank you for your continued support, and now let's get back to the show.
And so we've been talking about this project you've been working on, Transhumanism, the New Eugenics. And we've been talking a little bit as well about this notion of nature. And I think it's just such a complex thing. I think sometimes people think that, well, if this is my nature, then it's just the way I am, and I ought to just accept it, right? Other times we think of nature as, well, nature gives us disease. You're right, I have glasses because I can't see very well, so nature gives us a mess, and then we will fix nature, right? Kind of in this idea. And sometimes we think about Mother Nature, which is just kind of everything that's not human, right? And so could you share a little bit? I mean, you've been teaching about human nature, I said, for so long. You speak about it. You've written many books on this topic as well. What do you think? What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions about nature that harm our ability to live well? And then maybe what do you think is what's the proper understanding?
Okay. Well, I think it might be good to start with a proper understanding so we can see where you're going off. You could start with a kind of nature, like you could say the nature of a triangle is to have three sides. Okay, it's kind of defining what a triangle is. But there's an important difference when you come to non-mathematical natures, because when you get a human nature or the nature of an oak tree or something like that, it's not just what it is. Part of what it is to be striving, beyond itself, I mean, this is seen in development, right? So you have a young child. A young child is quite spontaneously, from his nature, we would say, is growing and developing, right? There's a kind of striving beyond the current stage and moving to something more. Earlier I talked about the nature of a pen or something like that, okay? And that's similar in that a pen has a function. We don't talk about a function of a triangle, right? Or the function of a pebble or something like that. We could talk about the nature of a triangle and the nature of a pebble, but we wouldn't be apt to talk about a function with regard to them. What the function is, the function of the pen to write, means that it has a kind of striving. Now, not literally, because it's an artifact, okay? But when we get to natural entities, there is literally a striving, right? And again, we see that in development most clearly. But even, once you're developed, just that your mind is working to understand, and that's kind of spontaneous. Now, of course, you can sit down and read and study, and you're choosing to do it, okay? But when an idea is presented to you, your mind is kind of reaching out and moving. So you've got this idea of movement beyond. And really, if there were no striving beyond, we'd have a static universe, okay? I mean, we're getting down now to the level of the pebble in the sense that even it moves according to gravity or something like that, right? So very minimal nature. It's not of the pebble, but of the mineral that it's made of, right? But even there, you find a kind of striving. And if we didn't have this striving, it would be a completely static universe. Think of a mathematical universe, right? Well, that would be a static universe, wouldn't it, right? So nature, what you are, human nature, what you are, isn't something static, right? It's something striving beyond. And we see this clearly in our powers or capacities. Most importantly in human beings is the capacity to reason, right? And that's a striving out to understand the world, right? There's a movement outward. But we have other capacities as well, something like reproductive capacities, a striving out, a movement outwards towards new life, right? And we have lesser knowing powers like imagination or just the power of sight. And these are all a kind of striving. Now, you have to put this all together to get a unified person, right? We're not just a collection of capacities, right? Think of something like a car. Pen is really simple. A car is an artifact that has a function, transportation, right? But it has all sorts of other capacities, you might say. It can honk a horn, right? It can cool off the air inside of you. It can play music, right? It can have doors that open and close. Now, it's not just a collection of these capacities, though. They're all structured and ordered for the main function, which is to transport, right? And so one mistake you might have, and I think it's there in the transhumanist movement, is, well, we're just really a bunch of capacities, right? And now we can improve them. We might add some new capacities here or there. Whereas, we are a bunch of capacities in a way, but like the car, we're structured and ordered, and it's all towards one ultimate goal, and that ultimate goal is reason. We are most fundamentally rational animals, reasoning animals, right? So we're this united whole that's moving and striving, right, for some completion. As I mentioned before, that striving is really always ordered beyond ourselves. Again, think of that car, right? It's not as if cars are just to transport themselves, right? They're striving beyond themselves in a way to transport human beings or cargo or whatever it might be, right? So it is with us that we're this well-ordered collection of capacities, unified collection that are striving ultimately to move beyond ourselves, right? To move towards others, ultimately to move towards the divine. So that's where you get a sort of coherent notion of human nature. And I think in a way, the whole modern project has been to redefine human nature in some way, or more profoundly even redefine nature entirely, right? Not just human nature, but nature in general. But you think of in philosophy the beginning of modern philosophy with Descartes. He creates a human being that's just a mind, right? It might have a body attached to it in some way or other, but it's kind of this independent mind. You go to Aristotle, and you see this unity I was talking about, because we have powers of senses, and with senses we have memory and imagination. And all of these things are important for how we understand the world around us, right? We use our senses to understand the world around us. For Descartes, it's just sort of, we got these ideas in our head, right? And so these other capacities we might have are not this ordered whole that we have. And again, even our body is not part of an ordered whole. We're just minds that are there. So one gets already a kind of definition of human being there. And then you find, say, in the British empiricists, so, I'm getting into heady philosophy here, but you get into the British empiricists, and they want to pull back from Descartes, who's got these minds where sensation isn't important, and they want to emphasize sensation, but so much so that now reason becomes just sort of a sort of power to manipulate sensations in some way or other. the redefinition comes down into Darwinian science as well, right? That we're sort of complex apes in some way or other is what we amount to in the end. And really, very importantly, the definition at that point has changed so that you no longer have any function, okay? Because part of the goal of Darwin and of many Darwinian evolutionists, it's not necessarily tied to evolution of itself, but it isn't below the surface often, is the idea that there is no purpose. It's just accidents that give rise to various capacities in various ways. So in the end, there's not a striving beyond ourselves. We just have matter bumping into each other is what it amounts to in the end, I think. And this is where the transhumanists are starting, right? They're starting with this Darwinian accumulation of random changes, and they're saying, why stop at random? Let's design it, right? Let's just keep on the process, but now let's design it. But again, by this time, human nature has lost all sense of having a purpose, and you get a kind of angst in modern society because of this, because we have no purpose in our lives. All we can do is entertain ourselves,
Yeah, that's really fascinating to think about that idea of, right, this kind of, and it's, you think about that striving nature, right? In Latin, nature comes from the word natus, to be born. In the Greek, physis, which is, we get our word physiology or something like that, physis, but it's that idea of that which grows of itself, which develops of itself, which therefore is striving for something more. Even, right, the tree is always trying to grow bigger, have more leaves, move, bring in water, give out, or, receive light. And so there's this growth, but the growth and the striving only has meaning as some kind of completion of this purpose.
Exactly.
And when you can't find that purpose, whatever purpose you have then becomes somewhat arbitrary, right? You just whatever purpose I happened to pick when I didn't have a purpose. So I happened to pick, for me, maybe I want to have a perfect body. Or you, because you're a philosopher, you want to have a perfect mind. Or you, maybe you want to have a perfect, you want to live forever, right? But all of these turn out to be something that just is kind of inherently, one, probably just unsatisfying. Even if you get it, it just wouldn't be that satisfying, right? And then secondly, it's also, you can't quite have it. You know what I mean? It's like we actually don't have perfect bodies. We don't have perfect minds. You can't really be perfect in this world. And so, one, you're striving after a goal that if you got it, you'd be dissatisfied. And secondly, you can't actually get it. So, I mean, I think you can kind of see how you kind of are painted a little bit into a corner.
Yeah. Absolutely.
According to this seems like a kind of if we're a creature that strives, right, then one of the problems is we can strive after the wrong things.
Yeah. I mean, you're really right on the mark there. And I think, you can bring it down to the level of this car again and say, imagine a car that just said, I really want to have a great stereo system. I don't care if I have any wheels or anything like that. I just want a great stereo system. And obviously, cars don't want things, but
sure,
But let's imagine this.
Car owners do.
Yeah. Or a car, says, I want the greatest horn there is, or I want to have the wonderful sunroof, but in the process, they give up transportation, and say, well, okay, you've missed something important here, right? and really, if your purpose is to transport, however great a stereo system you have, you're not going to be fulfilled, right? And so if your purpose is to know, and ultimately to know the divine, then however great a body you have, it's not going to be fulfilling, right?
Yeah. So this really does then get us in part back to right? We haven't gone there yet in this conversation, but to this big question is, right? Can you live a fulfilled moral life without God, right? And how would you? It seems that with the way you're describing, if we have a quest to know and a quest to love, well, we want to know and love creation. It would be weird not to be interested in the physical universe, the living universe around us, not to care about flowers. It would be weird not to have some interest in animals. We'd also want to know and love. I mean, just children do. I remember one of my mentors, Father Matthew Lamb, who helped start the graduate program in theology at Ave Maria. He would often say, like, what's the natural light of the intellect? Which sounds very abstract. It's just like children asking, why? Why, mommy? Why, mommy? Why, daddy? Why is the sun blue? Right? Why do the birds?
That's the striving, right?
Yeah, it's that desire to know. And they're obviously oriented to relation. Right? Everything's fine, but fundamentally, mommy's most important for a while, and this is just central. So, like, what's the understanding in kind of philosophical terms or theological, right? About how that then just has to ask, like, it can't stop with just animals and human beings. It's somehow oriented to something greater than us.
Yeah. If you look at Aquinas, you'll say, look, you've got this natural striving to know, right? That's why the children are asking why, right?
Yeah.
It's amazing. You see it very early on that, there's this natural striving to know, right? And Thomas says, well, if you want to understand, the causes of things. And so you recognize you get causes in the world, but at some point you recognize, well, but what's the cause of it all, right? And so you have to go back to the ultimate cause, which is God. So that's a kind of argument that he gives with regard to we can't stop at creation, right? But you can give, I think, also other sort of deeper arguments just about what the whole purpose of creation is. So the idea that I'd kind of like to develop is the idea of one thing existing for the sake of another. And this is the striving, right? So within a building, right, we're in this building and behind these walls, there are 2x4s or beams or something holding things up. And then you have the walls and there's a way in which the 2x4s exist for the sake of the walls. And what do these walls exist for? Well, they exist for you and me, right? Okay. So you've got one thing existing for another, and they're all striving out through their activity, right? The 2x4s are striving out by holding up the walls, right? And the walls are striving out towards us to protect us from the environment or something along that lines, right? So you've got this kind of one thing existing for the sake of another thing. But, in my example there, I've stopped at the human beings, but you can't stop at something that doesn't have its reason for existing in its very self, right? Because then at the end of the day, it's all pointless, right? So if the 2x4s exist for the walls and the walls exist for us, but we have no meaning, then neither do the 2x4s or walls really have any meaning, right? You've got to stop at something that has meaning in itself, and that's only going to be God, right? That God is his very meaning, is his very completion. And so you look at creation and you say, yeah, there is one thing ordered to another in creation. Ultimately, material creation is ordered towards human beings, as much as that might not be a popular view these days, but it is the case, right? And but we can't stop at human beings, right? Because we don't have the explanation for our own meaning within ourselves. Yeah. So ultimately, we're going to have to go to God.
Yeah, it's always kind of fun at first to think you're the highest thing in the universe. But then it turns out if you're the highest thing in the universe, that's actually pretty bad news. That's pretty bad news. And of course, the irony is if we do that, we actually very quickly just end up worshiping kind of governments. And whether or not you go back to the Egyptians who worshipped Pharaoh, the Babylonians who worshipped Nebuchadnezzar, Romans who worshipped, the Caesars, we worship government, we worship collective human beings, and there's nothing higher. And that ends up ironically leading us back into some of the awful aspects of totalitarian regimes that we've seen in the 20th century. And so by remembering that God is higher than I am, one, I have hope, but I also have a certain sense of there's a check on the world, even if it's not always going to be exercised in this life. And so we are getting towards the end of our time, but I just want to ask you one final question on this is, how does Christ make a difference here? Because I feel like in a way, the transhumanists are looking for a kind of salvation. There is something wrong with this world. It's not all well ordered. There's something off, and they're trying to come up with a human solution. And it seems like what they're missing is that God not only exists, and we ought to come to know and love him, but that he's actually provided a solution to sin and death and to defects.
Yeah. No, it's common to compare the transhumanist movement to a religion. And part of that is what you said, that it has its brand of salvation, right? We're going to save ourselves from all these defects that we might have in various ways. So it's a salvation not from sin, but from defects of nature, I suppose, and going beyond that to improve nature, of course. The role of Christ is first of all precisely because we are so profoundly wounded through our own sin, right? And on account of that, we need something to heal us. And that something can only come from God, but most fittingly from God who became man. And that's found in the person of Jesus Christ. And all of this, I think, is tied to part of recognizing our nature and having a purpose is recognizing that we're all quite small. We're insignificant of ourselves, and if we think we're so significant that we can redefine our nature, then we're going to lose sight of the fact that we're depending upon others. And most profoundly, we're depending upon Jesus Christ, right? And when we come to recognize that I'm always depending upon Jesus Christ, then we come to see how small we are. And, that shouldn't be taken as a negative thing. I mean, the transhumanist movement would say, well, yeah, here's this fatalism, that we're just this small, insignificant thing. But we've been given a part to play. And we shouldn't mistake it and say it's important only if it's grand, right? It's important if it's the part that God wanted us to play. That's what's going to be important. And none of us are going to have a real grand part to play, quite frankly. And I think we can realize that when we realize the only one who really has the grand part to play is Jesus Christ, right? Obviously, there are varying degrees in there, but he is, the top of everything, and we can never go beyond that. In fact, any part we have to play is going to be only in union with him. And so, our part's small, and we can recognize that by recognizing that what really matters is Jesus Christ, though. He has the big part to play. But he still wants me to play a part. It's a small part, but he wants me to play it.
That's beautifully put. I have 3 questions I like to ask our guests who come on the show. So what's a book you've been reading?
I've been reading Eric Varden lately. First, I read The Shattering of Loneliness, and I've maybe a third of the way through Entering the Twofold Mystery.
Okay, and Eric Varden, for listeners or viewers who may not know, is a bishop from Norway.
Correct.
Right? And I actually met him at a conference this summer, and okay. He's a holy and wonderful soul. I just started reading a book of his on chastity. So he's amazing.
He is amazing. I think he's a genius, really, quite frankly. Yeah,
that's great. What's a spiritual practice that you do on a regular basis to discover that meaning and that role that you play?
I mean, for me, and I think it's important for everybody, is just some time every day for mental prayer. Just fidelity to that. Sometimes, it can seem like a drag or something like that. So fidelity is important. But so this mental prayer is typically contrasted to vocal prayer, where you're reciting words or something like that. Where the mental prayer is you're putting yourself in a state of mind in which you reflect upon yourself in relation to God. And again, different people, different amounts of time, I suppose, but I think everybody should have some time every day for this mental prayer.
That's great. And so this is a Catholic theology show. And so one of the ideas is that theology matters, right? Our life is harder with bad ideas about God. So what's a bad idea you had about God, and what's the truth you discovered?
I mean, I guess the sort of controlling God in the extreme is that God controls everything so that free will has no place, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I don't want to give a misperception that God doesn't hold everything in his providence, right? But he doesn't do it the way a chess master does with the chess pieces, where he's picking them up and moving them around. He's so far beyond anything we can imagine that he lets us make our choices, and yet is playing the beautiful game of chess, if you will, through our choices, not by moving us here or there or there. And so I think that misperception of this kind of controlling God is one thing that I have striven to overcome at any rate.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Mm-hmm. Yes. What a gift to see that our Creator truly made creatures and we are, and therefore we truly act.
Exactly.
We truly exist. We truly have freedom, even though our existence is not divine. Right. And therefore, everything we have depends upon him. And we can also find meaning and purpose by receiving our natures as gifts, trying to heal and treat them when necessary, and also recognizing, though, that our deepest longings, are just not going to be fulfilled by getting a little bit better body or a better mind. Right. Our wounds are in a way of the heart. And they need to be healed by the Sacred Heart. So
exactly.
Well, thank you so much. Again, it's been Professor Stephen Jensen, who's a professor of philosophy. I think you have a chair, right? I should be mentioning it.
Yeah.
You're the Bishop Wendelin Chair in Graduate Philosophy.
Correct.
So anyway, thanks for the people who endowed that chair, and congratulations on your work. And for people who are interested in learning more or finding about some of your books, where are places they might go?
Well, there's always Amazon, I guess. Most of my books are with Catholic University of America Press, so you can go there. I have an author page on Amazon where I've collected them all together. I'm not much into social media, so I haven't put even a biography or a picture of myself up there, but at least I put all the books together there. So.
That's right. Yes, and listeners or viewers of the Catholic Theology Show actually can get a 20% discount at Catholic University America Press by putting in the code CT10. So anyway, so that's a great opportunity. And again, but you're at the University of St. Thomas in Houston.
Correct.
You went to seminary at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, so you went from the cold to the warm. But,
indeed, yeah.
But we're so glad you're here. I'm glad to have you at Ave Maria to give a talk on transhumanism, the new eugenics, to the student chapter of the Thomistic Institute. We're very grateful for your being here and grateful for you spending time on the Catholic Theology Show today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit the like button and subscribe to the Catholic Theology Show. Thanks, and God bless.